I look at data warehouses as a 60-year-old experiment that worked great in an age of BI, but it no longer works in an age of AI. You have to have AI living directly on top of live data systems instead of doing batch processing and premeditated data transformation. That world no longer exists.
Kyle Csik is the CEO and co-founder of adtech. His background is in physics and mathematics, which, as you'll hear, turns out to be exactly the right training for someone trying to redesign how enterprise data works from scratch. He spent his career working with companies like P&G, solving the gap between insights and execution. Adelaide is what happened when he decided to stop working around the gap and actually close it. Kyle, welcome to Inside the Blurb.
Great to be here, Sean. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. I've been doing a lot of learning about your product, and I can't wait to get into this. But let me start with reading your blurb as it appears on Blurbs and give you a chance to expand upon it. It says, Adelaide helps companies integrate AI into daily operations. They streamline AI adoption with intuitive tools and services, making it accessible and functional without deep technical expertise. The focus is on practical application rather than hype, enabling enterprises to harness AI for efficiency and innovation across different departments. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So the only thing I'd probably add to that is, we solved the data problem that's hindering AI adoption. We really wanted to focus on, we're never going to build a model. Anthropic, OpenAI, everybody else, they're crushing that space, and it's amazing. But when it comes down to bringing those models into your data and into your operations, there's a huge barrier to entry there. And so we wanted to solve the data problem that allows AI to just proliferate through an organization, and that's what we managed to solve.
So set that up real quick. I want to get into your background before we get too deep, but I want you to set this up. Who is your solution for? Like, what types of companies? Because we're talking about multiple data sets. So how big does the company have to be, or how small can it be? Is there any particular type of data, or is it all data?
Yeah. So it's really built for anybody in the enterprise space. There's a focus in marketing, and I'll get to what that looks like. But our technology doesn't suit companies like real estate development companies, unless they have like marketing arms, like a JLL or something like that. They have marketing divisions. But real estate moves at a glacial pace. There's no ability to increase the speed of how they function. It's not our target market. For areas where there's an opportunity to like accelerate how they perform their operations, automate different functions, not just program workflows, but actually automate things or get rid of workflows in their entirety by bringing a whole new breadth of intelligence to things, that's really what we focus on. Okay. So the way we do that is giving total omniscience to organizations and say, now that you can see your whole business, different departments within context of different departments, and you can make decisions in department A while the system understands what's happening in department B. And so you're making more holistic, better informed and omniscient decisions, and you can program the automation on top of that through agents.
Sounds like the ultimate silo killer for these big organizations.
Yeah. All right, organizations of tomorrow, they're going to be flatter. Look at NVIDIA, right? Look at all these big companies, and not just the technology ones. They're flattening.
So before we get into the sort of the bigger problem that Adelaide addresses, let's just set up like your background so people understand like how you got to where you are and why you're qualified to sort of solve this problem. So you have a background in physics and mathematics. Now you're the CEO of Martech. Talk to us about how that happened and the value that background brings to you in that role.
Yeah. Well, I've always loved solving problems. There's nothing I can't stand more than status quo, right? Computers have always been built on silicon, right? Since nearly the beginning. When I was in high school, I worked at Georgia Tech trying to help them build biological computers. So I've always been obsessed with like, hey, how do we actually like totally discard everything that we've done in the past, take first principles approach and say like, what would be really productive for us to build here? So one of the projects I did in high school was actually programming leech brains with basic arithmetic, addition and subtraction. We never really got to things like multiplication and division, but we were doing some really interesting work through Georgia Tech. When I ended up going to college, I was really intrigued by the idea of how do we create new glass materials, things that are going to enable things like the Minority Report to take off, where I'm looking through my cell phone. That type of world fascinated me. But if you're going to program interfaces on glass materials that are amorphous materials, you can't put it on a silicon chip, basically, and have all of the sandwich of technology kind of happening the way we have phones today. So that's always kind of intrigued me, this whole world of making things interconnected. How do we take a first principles approach? How do I program quantum interactions into computers? How do I query that? How do I put them under different circumstances? I've always just loved problem solving.
I mean, there's at least 2 other episodes in what you just said there around biological computers and the Minority Report, but we'll skip on that for now. So talk to us about your path, right? So how did you get from Georgia Tech and doing that to today? Like, what was that journey? What does it look like at a high level?
So I started my graduate studies in New Jersey, and I decided to take a trip into the city. My mentor, who was a super senior executive at AT&T, took me under his wing. I'll be eternally grateful to him for everything he's done for me. And he said, there's something happening in this advertising space. He's like, I don't really know what it is. I don't really fully understand it, but he had an engineering background and then ended up going into business. And he was like, you need to check this out. And what it was one of the first paradigms into biddable media in the advertising landscape. So it was an exchange, but there weren't even DSPs at the time. So we were, at the time it was called Context Web, and Big Lights, Big City came calling, and I was like, this is fascinating. Oh my God, I didn't even know what happy hour meant at the time. And I was like, this whole world is great. I love this. What do you mean expense accounts?
Right.
And so I fell in love with it immediately. And I love it to this day. And the people were amazing, but the technology was so curious to me because it was this biddable landscape that we were the buyer in it. And we were trying to figure out how to get buyers into our exchange. And it was a company named Context Web, one of the earliest exchanges in the marketplace. I think the only earlier one was maybe when Jeff Green started AdECN that he sold to Microsoft. They basically squashed it, and that's before he started the trade desk. So Context Web was so early for its day, they ended up merging with Daytran Media to form PulsePoint, which ended up being, a sizable company. And since then, they started focusing on healthcare, I believe, and I think they've sold to WebMD. I wish I knew what options meant at the time because I probably would have saved those.
You might have to. You know it.
Right? I wish I knew then what I knew now, my goodness, especially when it came to that stuff. So after that, I ended up making my way through. I really focused on programmatic media from all different sides of the spectrum, from the exchange side, from the DSP side, from the pub side, from the agency side. Once I got to the agency side and I had unfettered access to an entire industry, I was completely hooked. The people were amazing, but the ability to call anybody in the marketplace and ask them about their company and their product offering and try to look at the entire marketplace as a giant puzzle piece. And you could customize how you fit these companies and technologies together and Frankenstein them to end up being like, this is what I wanted on behalf of a customer, and understand how to make them interchangeable and how to make them work together and all that. It was just a giant puzzle. And having that vantage point hooked me immediately. And I never managed to, for years, I couldn't get away from the agency side because I loved that purview and I loved the people so much. Made some of my lifelong friendships there. And that's how I got to understand how to look at things in totality. I got to understand what clients were dealing with, and I was hooked on it.
So how did you get from the agency world to starting Adelaide?
So eventually, once I started realizing I was getting a little complacent, I felt like I was almost moving paper at some point. I started to think about how we were treating data. And me and a former C-level executive at Mindshare actually were considering how do we actually start a company around combining data and early days at Hearts and Science and Omnicom when they have their Omni product, which I was an early contributor to there with Scott Hagedorn, Megan Pagliuca, and Sam Levine Archer and others, genius people. It was like, how do we create deterministic match tables across all these data sets and then download those data sets, put them into a Snowflake environment, and then make them accessible? And now we have all these systems really working together at a data level. And it was such a Herculean effort that it was almost too much in some ways. But I started to realize the problem with data is that one of my advisors, Peter Naylor, said it perfectly. He said, I never realized how much time we're spending preparing to work instead of getting to the work. And that was really one of the defining lines of this Adley company that I started with my co-founder, Sasha. What I realized was that by trying to centralize data, put it all into a common environment of a data warehouse, take it from Trade Desk, take it from Double Verify, take it from Google Campaign Manager, take it from wherever you want to take it from. You're doing batch processing, downloading the data, co-locating it, and then you're transforming that data to answer specific business questions you've premeditatively considered. And then you're making it available to BI or nowadays AI. There's only so much you can do with that. And what I started to realize was my entire career was stuck in the days of Napster. For anybody that's over probably 38, you might remember Napster. And that whole thing was about downloading data, turning it into playlists, and putting it onto an iPod. That's how we treat data today. We still treat it that way. I have to co-locate to turn it into a playlist, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And so I came together with my co-founder and said, this is a problem. We're taking a 60-year-old process. When IBM pioneered centralized computing in the 1960s, and that's still the process. It went IBM to Oracle to Teradata to Snowflake, the same co-location process, transform, make accessible. It's the same for 60 years, the Napster model. And so we came together and took a first principles approach and said, AI is not going to work on top of a broken data infrastructure. It's not going to work on top of a broken data system. What can we do? Do we delete? Do we automate? What do we do? And our solution was that we had to delete.
So for clarity, you said, I think about Napster. If I made that playlist after I downloaded the music and I wanted to add a song to that playlist, I had to download that song again and create a whole new playlist.
Yep.
That's essentially what you're saying with data. You download it, you move it over to the co-location to Snowflake. If you want to add more to it, you got to download it and then rebuild that data set and then do it again and again and again. And we all know data moves fast, and so it's likely outdated by the time you finish. Fair?
Yeah, I'll push on the metaphor a little more. That's close, and maybe we're saying the same thing, but maybe I say I have the workout playlists, and I drag and drop 30 different songs into my workout playlist. And then I have my short drive playlist, and then I have my long drive playlist, right? And that's how we used to manage songs. You just drag and drop these songs into these playlists. But if you wanted to add the new song, you had to download it, and then you had to move it to your playlist, or you had to make a new playlist. Or if you're going on a specific road trip and you're like, hey, I'm going through Nashville, I'm going to make a country music playlist, you have to premeditatively consider that. So you always have to know where you're going and premeditatively organize your playlists, aka your data, to be able to accommodate that projected scenario. But now the Spotify of data exists, which is Adelaide. And Spotify said, well, no, when you're in Nashville, just like country music, play it based on my history, based on my interests, based on all this stuff. Play country music. hey, you know what? We're going through Oklahoma. I want to listen to, whatever. I want to listen to
country music.
country music. Yeah, I'm going through Louisiana. Play me some country blues. so I'm on a country kick, I guess. And so we had to make the Spotify of data because we're too locked in business to saying, what data do I need to answer these sets of questions? And we're too locked into that. We're not agile enough in the data. And so we have meetings for the data, for the meeting, for the decision, and it's crippling our organizations.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've heard you say things like you've been automating yourself out of a career.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. You can clean that up. What did you mean by that? Like, give us an example.
So, I mean, when I was, this was a fun one. So it used to be in programmatic on the publisher side. I don't know what it's like anymore. There were no restrictions on being able to put floors into things. So I would create my own bid histogram every single day and understand by client, by ad slot. And when I was doing this, we were managing homes.com, forrent.com, a whole bunch of whatever.coms. And anything trader.com, like there was a ton of ad positions that I was responsible for. And so every day I'd look at every single different brand that was bidding on every single ad position. And I would artificially put in a floor because it was a second price auction at the time. I'm assuming it still is. And I would put an artificial bid in right under what they were bidding. And so we skyrocketed, our revenue from that. But I'm not going to do that work every day. Like, there's no chance. I'm actually an incredibly lazy person in a lot of ways, but I work really hard to be lazy. So I worked really hard to be able to figure out how to automate this false floor system and manipulate it. And then I ended up putting those in. And every day I came up with a system that would automatically do all that. So I got to chill for a solid couple months, which was quite nice at the time, summertime in the living ZZ. And I would just kind of go to the office, chill. It was great. And my system took care of it. And I automated myself out of a job while performing admirably.
It's a good story. All right. So I was looking at your website and it says on the homepage that your data warehouse was built for a world that no longer exists. What world was it built for and how has it changed?
It was built for an age of BI. And the data warehouse was built for an age where that still exists today, where it's read information, understand a bunch of co-located data, read it in a dashboard, and then you yourself go take action. Because you as a person, you have to add context to that data. I'm looking at my Trade Desk Tableau dashboard that has Trade Desk downloaded into Snowflake, and then I'm looking at the performance of it in Tableau, and I have my dashboard set up, and it's great. But I also know, because I was in the meeting with the other team, I know what's happening in Amazon ads. I know what's happening in Google. I know what's happening. So I have context about the broader business because of meetings. I also am adding my historical context and my wisdom to this. And so I'm reading the data, I'm interpreting it because of context, and then I'm choosing to make actions. And that's how, business really works. That's how the world works today. We've developed a new technology that is itself able to understand the context, sometimes even better. We have one client who ran a test and they were able to find that they were processing information 85% faster while processing 25% more information. Mm-hmm. So they were leaving 25% of the information that could have led them down a different decision path because they weren't able to see everything because they were manually going into all these systems. We needed to develop a system that was more appropriate for AI that gives the total omniscience across your data. So AI has to be able to see YouGov. It has to be able to see what's happening in all of your performance media stuff. It has to see what's happening in your sales, what's happening in your supply chain. So we had to plug into NetSuite and SAP and Amazon ads and Amazon Seller and Shopify and Google ads and Meta and all of these systems until we have total omniscience so that you can see everything. And then the AI is able to understand everything in context. So when you say, I want you to update every week, I want you to automatically take these considerations. I want you to think about this AI system, and I want you to think about that. And I want you to look at the totality of the data, process it, and then I want you to take action in this particular system. Maybe it's inside of a Google system or whatever it is. You can just do that now.
So let's set the table for this, and let's keep in mind they're going to do this verbally, right? There's no slides, there's no demo here.
God no.
So you have to articulate to the audience how Adelaide works, and I'm gonna start it off because I want you to build on it or correct me. If I were an enterprise brand and I was going to work with Adelaide, I would plug in all of my marketing channels, all the platforms I advertise on. I'm going to plug in all of my accounting platforms, all my sales platforms, my supply chain, my delivery platforms, anything that from the time the time I start creating a product to selling it to getting it in the hands of the consumer, all of those platforms plug into Adelaide, and then am I right so far? Okay.
Yep.
So everything. So I think if you're a marketer listening, they're used to thinking about just Meta and TikTok and their DSP, right? You're saying it's not just the marketing department, it's the marketing department, it's the e-commerce department, it's the shipping department, the finance department, everything, soup to nuts. Plug it in because if it has something to do with the business, and then take it from there.
I mean, marketing has been operating with both arms tied behind their back, and they have been the scapegoat for business problems and being asked to fight against a market where they don't have access to information. They're being told, do your job, but we're not going to give you access or resources for SAP information. So you don't know your supply. You don't know how much inventory you have out there. You're not privy to the information that exists inside of Salesforce. You don't know that Walmart just upped their contract with you by 10% because the sales were accelerating and they updated the contract. No, marketing finds out 3 weeks later and has to go through a fire drill and figure out how to uphold either terms that are marketing specific in that contract, or they have to figure out how to get that product off that shelf. And so marketing's constantly battling a world with both arms tied behind their back and then expected to be the scapegoat at the same time. It's an abusive relationship, really.
But it explains why marketing departments are the first ones to get cut when there's playoffs, right?
Right. It's like an entire industry that's perpetually gaslighted and then abused. It's terrible. And so what we wanted to do was say, you don't need to be just the GRP team. You can be the I moved pallets of inventory team, right? Understand your Nielsen and your ComScore performance data and the exposure, and then also the Circana data, and you take everything about your marketing and business. But you can also understand the metrics and the success metrics by saying, hey, you know what? Walmart hasn't been putting product on shelf. And we've noticed that our product accelerates when we own the shelf space, because we take advantage perhaps of that impulse purchase where people don't care about the label necessarily. Toothpaste is a fantastic example. Every time you walk into the toothpaste aisle, you have a 64% refresh rate on brand allegiance, which is a shocking statistic because I'm married to my toothpaste brand. I'm not going to say it right now because I want them both as clients, but but I'm married to my toothpaste brand. But 64% of people are willing to buy one or the other, or nowadays it's kind of a third contestant in it. So if you own the shelf space, if you own 60% of it, you're going to sell more product. But marketing is treating those geographic regions basically the same as regions where they own 20% of the shelf space, perhaps. And then marketing is running the same analytics and expecting similar results and saying, we targeted the same people. We did the same thing. The demographics are the same in these towns. And they're not even privy to the information about how much product was actually pushed to shelf through SAP information. That's not fair. That's not right. That's an injustice to marketing being able to provide business outcomes instead of being the GRP team. So that's what we wanted to understand was you can plug everything in without a data warehouse. We understand your marketing endeavors through the context of this extra added data because marketing's so pervasive, so influential across these things. Stop looking at it in a chasm. Understand it through supply chain and logistics, understand it through finance, understand it through all these other pillars because they're all so interconnected in this globalized world.
I want to connect this conversation or this piece of the conversation with where we are today in the world of AI. I listen to a lot of AI podcasts. I play around with the tools, and there's all these conversations, and I've done some of this with my own computer. It's just the connectors, right? Like I go into my Claude and I connect my Slack, my Gmail, my Drive. I don't even know what else it's saying, right? And it's supposed to do something similar. Or it brings everything together, right? So I can run reports and that sort of stuff. What's to say I can't go into Claude and put all of these different platforms as connectors, assuming they were available as connectors? Is that essentially what you're doing, or is there a relationship between Adderley and the LLMs?
Yeah. So we integrate. If you look at Claude, look at ChatGPT, look at Glean, look at Workato, right? There's a very good reason that all of them, and look at Zapier, there's a good reason that every single one of them have the same connectors. They're all the same because they're publicly available API documented connector specs. Like you can just have a robot crawl them, and you can nowadays just spin up 10,000 connectors, spending a few bucks on tokens. It's not that hard. But when you plug in with Salesforce and like most of these systems, when you plug into just the search API of Salesforce, and then you're taking that first page search results essentially, and then regurgitating it to a user, you're not going to get a good response from that. So the volume of a lot of those connector tools and the depth of those connector tools is insufficient for what enterprises really need. They need full depth. They need every single one of the 81 APIs out of Salesforce, including custom fields. And that's what we enable in Salesforce. They need every morsel of data out of Nielsen. They need every morsel of data out of YouGov. Right? And so it's all of that information that we're able to orchestrate. So we have a very close relationship, and our system is very close with the actual data sources. And we have a layer of intelligence that's not only able to understand the data relationships within each data source, but also across data sources. And we're able to build that and also made it totally portable. You can talk to all your data through Adderley, but you can also talk to all of your data in Claude because we made it totally portable. So you can talk to it in Claude. You can do things like take my audience from A, my audience from B system, match them according to email addresses, perform this logic on it in real time, and then do this with it.
Okay, so let's give somebody a use case that a marketing use case, right? Because that's who we're trying to talk to here, and we can go deeper into the portability piece, right? So that's different than most platforms, right? So you're saying the marketing team doesn't have to live in Adelaide at all; they can stay in, say, Copilot or wherever they do their work, and you, Adelaide, would be powering the data behind it.
Correct.
Can you elaborate? Like, what is that?
Yeah. So let's look at a good use case, like you said. So let's look at something we're doing for one of our clients that is around looking at product trend analysis. Product trend analysis and looking at it in all the social channels and saying, hey, I'm a retailer and I want to understand what's trending by different geography. It's not really information you'd put into a data warehouse anyway. We're not trying to be bulls in china shops and saying your data warehouse needs to completely dissolve today. This is an incremental value use case to what you wouldn't put in a data warehouse. So it's take trend analysis, find geography for what's trending on social media. Look at our ERP. Do we have product on shelf that fits that category? Maybe it's hairnets, maybe it's a particular health cereal, maybe it's whatever. If we have product on shelf, increase price. If product's not on shelf, move product from where it's not trending to where it is trending. And right now we're really focused on price, but that next iteration is to start moving product with the field ops teams.
So that was my next question. So if I'm in the marketing department and I see in the data something that you just described there, which is like we have too much here and not enough there. Now, is the marketing person going to email another department and say, "Hey, you need to move product"? Shouldn't the other department already know that? Like, how do you envision that working in this example in the future if you were running the company?
So this one, in this example, it goes straight to the field ops team, powered by the marketing team's insights. This technically lives under the marketing team because it has to do with product trend analysis through social, so it just fits under their purview. But the end action point comes in an automated trigger that ends up going to the field ops team saying, hey, go do this. Increase price, put stickers on shelf, boom, done. The next iteration of this and what I envision as what I would like to do, and I think we're going to be able to do, is actually automate product momentum by updating ERP records. So actually writing into these systems, because we have full read and write capabilities into every single one of these systems. There's a level of liability to these things that we need to work out with, and we do that only on a client-by-client basis. But we go through that process, and now nobody needs to be in the loop. It's just updated in the ERP. Pricing's updated in the ERP. Now we're reading the POS system data to understand what actually got purchased. And it's an automatic feedback loop. You can say, hey, I want you to think about it like this system, Adderley plus Copilot. I want you to think about it like this. And then it'll automatically be able to embrace that wisdom that the person brought to the equation and automate what that person's trying to achieve.
So you're setting up those automations. Does Adderley eventually become invisible to the end user?
I think so. I like the idea of it being pretty invisible. We do consider ourselves more of an infrastructure company. We do want to live more behind the scenes. We do want to orchestrate the data. We want to enable companies, but it should function in a pretty invisible way where people are interacting through Adderley platform itself. They're interacting through agents. They're building their own agents. They're doing whatever workflows they want to do, whatever models. Because it's totally portable, your memory from one agent that you're running is feeding the Adderley system, and that memory is feeding another agent you might be running. So your memory is also consistent across a fragmented ecosystem of agents that will inevitably come around the bend.
Is there a scenario where Adderley is surfacing observations that maybe they're not questions that someone's asking?
Yeah, so we're trying to figure that out. The answer is yes. And actually, I was talking to a healthcare client today. So the answer is yes. The question is how do we price it? And I don't know how we price that. So where Adderley itself is, right now it can already bring forward some insights, and it can already say, hey, I noticed this correlation in your data sets. And did you know that weather patterns seem to correlate with this about your product sales or about supply chain and logistics or whatever it is? So we can already do that, but really running like an audit of all your data sets across all your fragmented ecosystems and looking at, and the use case today was, this company is spending over $1 million a month for multiple systems that they don't use anymore, but they don't want to get rid of it because they'll lose access to the data. So they're like, well, can you help us with that? and understand through the log files and run on a regular basis the usage of our platform, so we're not treating $1 million a month like everybody else treats like their Netflix subscription. And when it goes up in price, we don't even think about it, right? Like that's how they treat $1 million monthly bills. So the answer is yes. We just haven't like mechanized it yet to like the scale we want to go.
So I want to go back to something earlier on. When we talk about data warehouses, does Adelaide displace them? In other words, do I need to have a data warehouse of an enterprise company if I have Adelaide?
Yes.
You do.
You don't need it. We do displace them.
Okay.
Unambiguously, yes. I look at data warehouses as a 60-year-old experiment that worked great in an age of BI, but it no longer works in an age of AI. You have to have AI living directly on top of live data systems instead of doing batch processing and premeditated data transformations. That world no longer exists. AI living and reading and writing on top of live data systems is what gets us into omniscience, and it's what gets us into absolute automation.
So it's real-time data. I mean, just trying to simplify that. You're basically looking at real-time data all the time, and you're making decisions or helping companies make decisions based on that data in real time. As things change, as the data changes, they can react,
including write-ups.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be a report. It can be like, do this now. Like it's
Exactly.
gonna. I was thinking as you were talking, like there's going to be a hurricane in the Northeast on Sunday. So ship all your product today. Don't wait till Saturday.
Right.
Something like that. Like
we're not here yet, but there's a world that's not far away for Adelaide, where if you're a chocolate manufacturer, let's say, and you're producing your raw product in New Guinea, right, which I think is a production hub there, and you're taking raw material and you're shipping it across the ocean, and then you're processing it here in the United States, and the output is confectionery products. And then you have to take that confectionery product and you have to distribute it across the United States, and you have to market it. And you've got to sell it to your distributors like Walmart and Kroger, et cetera. Like there's a whole lot of things in that approach. Mm-hmm. What if there's a bad crop yield one year? What happens? Well, I don't know this business inside and out, so I'm not going to claim this is accurate, but it's logical to say, well, if there's a bad crop yield that year because of some sort of drought or whatever it is, there's going to be less raw products to produce things, which means there's going to be a lower volume of product on shelf. I don't know, maybe that process takes 1 year from bad storm system to 1 year later, there's fewer product on shelf, which means increased price of product. That changes your marketing. And if you're planning your marketing 1 year ahead of time, but you're planning it on last year's data, last year's pricing, and last year's crop yields and everything, isn't it interesting to think about how marketing can get ahead of things now? And you can say, hey, crop yields were like this is impacting this is how we're shipping it. In 1 year, we expect prices to actually go up, volume to be down. This is what our contracts end up looking like with customers typically when this happens. We need to plan our marketing and media initiatives like this. We need to address a person that's going to be willing to pay for a higher thing. 1 year in advance, you're able to more accurately predict those things because you're seeing the total context of your business. The people in charge of the crop yields already know this, but they're not talking to the marketing people.
Yeah, I venture to say that you could even go a step further and say, based on weather patterns and something that's happening with the crops early on in that process could be a red flag to say you should be looking for backup, crops somewhere else in the world to fill that void. Just like we're doing with oil right now, right? If you're China,
right,
or you're South Korea, you're looking to the United States to buy oil because you can't get it through the Middle East. So, if you didn't have those relationships already, laid out, you'd be in a real world of hurt right now because you're running out of oil. It's the same thing with what you're talking about, right? If I can't get my cocoa, and I know about it 8 months ahead of time, I can go look somewhere else and buy more cocoa before the costs go up.
But what's good about it too is that what you've done is You've taken an array of structured data, an array of unstructured information, and just information in totality, and you've given it to the machine to process in a way that no person could ever be expected to do. So when a person goes into these systems nowadays, these AI systems, whether it's Adderley or Claude, and they go in and they start performing their marketing initiatives, as you're reading the logic of it and how it's going through its thinking, you're going to see, oh, I noticed crop yields were down. Oh, I noticed supply chains were like this. Oh, I noticed a hurricane coming in through Atlanta that has a huge amount of product on those containers, and we're not going to be able to get it out west. There's going to be delays there. So like it's able to understand the context of these things that we've never been able to expect of people. And that's why I think a lot of these systems, like you can introduce all of this automation, but it's intelligence automation. It's not like I'm going to get rid of all these people. It's we're automating the intelligence to make better media planning initiatives. It's making everything better because it's automated in that context and that knowledge. But it's not automating the jobs, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think it's making people smarter and more aware. If I work in an enterprise and I'm listening to this podcast, I'm thinking this sounds amazing. Especially if I'm if I'm a senior executive, I'm thinking this is a game changer. But then I imagine they're thinking through the bureaucracy of their organization, data security being top of the list for something like this, especially if you have read and write access. How do you think about it there? How have you tackled that challenge with the organizations you're working with?
So there's 3 different things in there, I think. Great question, Sean. So the first one is security. That's easy. It's shockingly easy. When you take data and you download it into Snowflake, you've taken data that lives behind a data governance process, like it's in SAP or Salesforce or Trade Desk or Google or whatever, and it had the CIO office give the blessing for that data governance. And then you download it into a data warehouse or you move that data. Did you know they say 90% of data lives behind logins and paywalls? Did you know 90% of the data is just copies of other data? Only 10% of the world's data is actually unique data. Everything else is just copies. And every single time we copy that data, we have to implement new data governance processes. So because we plug in directly to these individual systems, we actually map directly to their security processes. CIOs love us because we just tie directly into their RBAC or their security governance. And if you have access to this data inside of that tool, let's say Google or the Trade Desk or Double Verify or YouGov or whatever you have access to, we respect that. And when you're talking to it through Adderley or Claude or Copilot or whatever, you're only able to talk to what you have access to. If you as an individual don't have write access, you and your agents wouldn't have write access. So that's the security thing. We love CIOs. It's one of our favorite departments. We're a technical organization. We love working with CIOs. We made sure that we took care of them just as much as the marketers as well as procurement teams. So the second thing that you were kind of getting at is how do you deal with kind of this cultural shift? I think part of the answer to that is to get people comfortable by doing a kind of crawl, walk, run. We never walk in and say, we're going to get rid of all this data warehouse stuff you've been doing for the last decade. Yeah, it's no longer necessary. It's got to be a crawl, walk, run scenario for us and our clients, right? And we have to prove ourselves by bringing incremental value in ways that don't fit what they've already done. So that example I used before of like understanding trend analysis, mapping it to ERP data, and you can use that type of thing to say, hey, we're going to put new end caps in. We're going to put stickies on the shelves. We're going to do, whatever fits the retail need there. That's incremental to a data warehouse. You don't do that stuff in there. So that's typically where we start. And then we're able to be like, hey, that data that you're putting in there, you're probably spending about $250,000 just in overhead to manage that process through batch processing. Why don't you move it over to Adley? It's on average about a 72% savings because you're not dealing with all the processing and all the stuff and all the overhead of transformations and warehousing and all that stuff. Save 72%, move that one over. It's going to make this process stronger. Move POS data over to Adley. We'll give it to you for free for 3 months just to test it. And if you don't like it, no harm, no foul. You already kept it on your data warehouse. Move that over, move that over, move that over, move that over. So it's healthier for us, and it builds a stronger relationship for us to prove ourselves before we start becoming more pervasive within organizations. It's healthier for the relationship for us, and it's also more iterative for our customers that they can kind of go along for that ride, because we're talking about companies that have 10,000 plus people working there.
Yeah, it sounds like there's benefits. I mean, there clearly is benefits to the entire organization, right? There's cost savings in terms of processing data, surfacing that data, and leveraging that data, right? It's not just one of the three; it's all three.
Exactly.
There's a lot of efficiencies, not just in the production, but in the execution of the sale.
Yep, exactly.
And
sorry to cut you off, Sean.
No, please.
My favorite part is that nobody came to work because they wanted to be an Excel jockey. Nobody is passionate about preparing to work. I'm convinced everybody does want to work in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not in their existing jobs, but people want to be productive. The problem is that they're just held down so much. I feel like there's this thing in the corporate world that we've just come to accept of like getting complacent about about succumbing to the bureaucracy and the unnecessary meetings and the lack of productivity. And I think people would be happier if they were empowered to be more productive. I think, and this is my rosy-eyed glasses that my wife tells me I have all the time, which I do. I'm a grossly excitable optimist. But, I think people would be happier if they're not corralling data or going to unnecessary meetings. I mean, there's enough memes of it on Instagram, for crying out loud, that say, oh, that could have been a meeting. Here's an email that this meeting could have been an email. We can start to chip away and get away from all the stuff that people don't like doing anyway and empower them to be more productive, keep that same workforce. And now your company's producing much more healthy cultures and more happy people that want to be more productive and want to lean into the problems of the company because they don't feel like they're drowning.
Yeah, I think people feel more like they're impacting the business in a real way, not just like, oh, I processed this piece of data. It's like, no, I actioned on some data. Right. Data is not fun. So when you look at companies today, and the way they're structured, can you look at a company and say, okay, they're ready for Adelaide, they're not ready for Adelaide? Like, what does one look like versus the other?
If you have over 80% market share in your business, I don't touch you. I won't go anywhere near your business. Okay. Those companies, God bless them. I'm sorry.
Who has 80% market share of their business?
There's more than I thought. Actually, I won't name them because we have had active discussions with them, but like what I have found is that they don't want more margin. They don't want more efficiency. They don't want more growth. They want to protect. We're not a company that's built for protecting, right? We're a company that's built for growing, that's built for improving your efficiencies and your effectiveness. We're talking to some large financial institutions that are on the scale of several $1 trillion of management that they have under management. And they're competing against these BlackRock type companies that are $14 trillion under management. Right. And just saying the word trillion is ridiculous to me. Like, that's just monopoly money. But, we're talking to the $1 trillion Davids compared to the $1 trillion Goliaths and talking to them about how do they compete more aggressively with BlackRock and Vanguard. and we've been able to bring them some solutions, and they're like, so we can actually not only discover opportunities, but actually action on them faster than Goliath is even able to identify the opportunity. We're like, yeah. So like, you'll be able to go through these processes and your people will be wheeling and dealing and making deals and doing the human aspects, but our system is empowering them to operate at the speed that they want to operate at.
Talk about some customers that have gotten real results. And I don't mean like before and after data. I mean like you've changed, Adelaide's helped them change the way they work. Kind of like you were just describing as being the ultimate goal. People really want to contribute. Do you have some use cases so far? I know you're early, but
yeah,
you actually change that?
So one of our clients was, excuse me, I'll deal with more kind of the feeling that they were dealing with. They felt like they were building decks for their clients. They're a media owner, and they were building decks for their prospective clients in isolation, and they were dealing with unrealistic turnarounds, and they were unhappy with the output of their work. Right? They were doing as great of work as any person could be expected to do under the constraints that they were given, but they didn't feel comfortable really standing behind that. They wanted to ask for another few days that oftentimes weren't granted so that they could stand behind the work with a little more credibility and a little more self-fulfillment on like what they had produced. And so they're using Adderley now. And what they're doing is they're looking at not only the RFP, and there's like 1.5 million tools, any AI tool you can just upload an RFP to and say, hey, write me a whatever credible output. But that's not good enough. With Adderley, they're using all of the historical performance data for those clients. And they say, hey, here's the RFP. I want you to look at all the ad server information and all historical performance data. I want you to look at all the communications that we've had with this customer, and I want you to process what they actually care about and what things we should be steering clear of. Then I want you to go into my Google Drive, and I want you to understand every deck that we've actually put forward with them. And I want you to understand what has gone through. What have we proposed using Salesforce? What have we proposed in the past that has gone through and sold to them versus what has been proposed and not sold through to them? And so very quickly, what they're able to do using Adderley by having structured data and unstructured information, providing context to a single cohesive response, is they're actually using Adderley to be able to craft more powerful RFP responses that are generating a higher conversion rate than they experienced before. So they're making more money, but they're also standing behind their work. And they're feeling empowered. So this is a sales team that's like, oh, I actually like this output. I'm going to tweak this, and that because I'm going to add my little wisdom flair because I was at dinner with the client and they told me something that Adderley isn't privy to. You know, we're not putting microphones on people just yet, and I don't want that day to come ever. So, you know, there's a real value there to these people who are they're happier. They're able to deal with client solutions more instead of being in decks and moving things over 10 pixels to make a better deck experience and propose a better plan. At least helping them do all that so that they can focus on the relationships so that they don't have to be bogged down by all the crap.
Right. And more tension, right? You're not just constantly selling and churning and selling and churning.
Right.
It's easier to keep that customer than it is to buy a new one, and it's flywheel, right? Let's shift our conversation to the future, right? So clearly this is bigger than a data analytics tool. This is operational. I mean, this is transformative. How do you think about the future for Adderley? Like when you think about where this can go, obviously you have a lot you want to accomplish in the next year, 2 years, 5 years. So where do you see Adderley in 5, 10 years? Like how do you see it evolving? And I know it's a loaded question because things change so quickly, but when you think about the vision for the company, where does your head go?
In all honesty, I see it kind of disappearing into the background. So there's a video on X and Instagram of Mark Benioff, the founder and CEO of Salesforce. and he buys a Tesla Optimus robot, and that robot is walking around the office. Mark, I guess, likes to drink Coca-Cola. So he asks I don't know how much an Optimus robot costs, but maybe what, 500,000, $1 million, something like that. So he's got this, call it $1 million piece of technology. And he says, hey, Optimus, do we have any Coke in the fridge? Can you get me one? And the robot says to him, I don't know. Take my hand and we'll walk over to the fridge together and see. Sean, if I pay $1 million for a robot and I still have to do the same shit I was doing before spending $1 million, I'm going to be pissed. If that's what robots are going to do for us, then we failed. So Adderley, because it is so adept at being able to connect disparate systems, it's so good at being able to run linear regression models, time series analysis with precision across different data sets, but also connects things like an LG refrigerator to a Tesla robot. Inside of LG refrigerators, they're already putting cameras in there. And it's not a big stretch to say, and we've already talked to some technology manufacturers about introducing some technologies like this and saying, we can connect the fragmentation of physical technologies just as much as digital technologies into the world, and we can make things interconnected. So, shipping sensors, Tesla robots, LG refrigerators, the trade desk, all of these things, we want to really just disappear into the ether and become a nice fabric that connects a world of federated information. Because as sensors take off, as robots take off, if we're still trying to centralize data, the world will never work.
You said something earlier, it's going to be funny at first, when you talked about the robot. It sounded like maybe Mark just isn't very good at prompts. Maybe he just didn't ask the robot the right thing the right way. How much of working with Adderley, if I'm a marketer or a head of e-commerce and I'm thinking about Adderley, how much of it is prompting? Like once all the connections are made, do I have to be a prompt engineer? Do I have to learn how to be a better prompter? Like, what kind of training is involved in getting information out of it that I want?
So in Adderley itself, it's called elicitation. And we have, because of these like genius quantum computing PhDs that have joined Adderley under our mission, we've been able to build one of the most robust elicitation engines that understands the intent of whatever a user is really after. But we don't just understand what the user's after, we also understand the structure of the data and the interconnectedness and the relationships of all the data, both within data source and across data sources. So being able to bring those two things together, to be able to say, this user is looking to achieve this, what data do we have? But then also be able to ask the question when there's conflicts back to the user and saying, I know you asked about viewable impressions. Do you use Campaign Manager where I'm seeing viewable impressions, or do you use Double Verify where I'm also seeing viewable impressions? And the user can say, actually, we use Double Verify viewable impression counts divided by total impressions on a Campaign Manager. Adderley stores that into memory, so you don't need to ask that type of stuff again. And now you have a very deep understanding of you that is compounding over time. So you don't need to be some expert prompt engineer to figure these things out. Beyond that, you're not starting from scratch when there's a new model, right? Everybody was on ChatGPT and everybody switched to Claude. What's going to happen next? Nobody knows.
So arms race for sure.
And we make that whole memory, that whole elicitation, the whole data infrastructure, your whole data estate is totally portable with you. So when something new comes out, you're not starting from scratch again.
I think that's all really important because it takes a lot of the fear away from this conversation. I think people have just in general around AI, right? Like it's overwhelming. There's a fear of where do I start and what do I do next and how do I stay ahead? And then you end up like paralyzed, right? And I think it's just keep doing what you're doing. Ask questions that you're asking today, and you'll naturally learn more questions that you can ask. Like you'll learn that you want more because you're going to get what you want faster. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to think about it. Okay, I just have two last questions.
Sorry, real quick on that, Sean. So one of the things that we already have put into the platform, it's in its earlier stages, and it's kind of relating to something we talked about earlier, is kind of looks at all the questions you have asked it, and then Natalie asks itself, what questions have you not asked me? And it asks itself those questions in the background, and then we're releasing Natalie terminals soon. And that's all the questions that you never thought to ask that might have interesting insights that you might not know about. So we're helping the user by proactively bringing things to light, because I think curious minds are going to be ruling the days of tomorrow. If you're not curious, you're not going to be winning.
It's better than a spouse. So is there one sentence, this is sort of moving on to like the adoption process, is there one sentence you wish every enterprise buyer understood about the difference between Natalie and the AI layer on a data warehouse?
Do you want to keep preparing to work, or do you want to just get to the work?
Yeah, drop the mic right there. I think that's a great way to put it. All right, one last question.
That's a Peter Naylor quote through and through.
Drop it. What do you know now that you wish you would have told yourself on day one of your career? Not Natalie, your career. It's pretty deep, right? Because it's not tactical.
Yeah, you know what I would have said? I would have said, when I move companies, make sure I keep the relationships I had at other companies. The relationships is the only thing that matters. Starting a business has been the hardest thing of my entire life. I've got 3 kids. Starting this business, it has been harder than even the first year of life of each one of those kids. It has been tremendously difficult. And being able to lean on the people that I love, my family, leaning on collaborators of the past, calling in people that I haven't talked to in a long time, has been my lifeline. And had I put more effort into keeping some of those relationships, juggling those relationships, instead of being like, I'm just so busy. I adore this person and I respect them and I really appreciate them so much as a person. If instead of just being like, but I don't have time for it, make the time.
Yeah,
make the time for the people. It's the only thing that matters.
I think it's the human side, right? It's a nice plug for our other podcast, which is the human side of MarTech, because at the end of the day, all this tech still needs people, and there's people behind it, every aspect of it, right? Whether it's the buying or the selling or the using or the evaluation, there's people, there's humans everywhere. And so the relationship's really important because you want people's opinions and advice and support. So we'll leave it there. Kyle, thank you for being on Inside the Blurb, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks so much for having me, Sean.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of the MarTech Matrix, a Blurbs production. To see what's coming up next, visit themartechmatrix.com. And if you're looking for your next MarTech solution, start your search at trustblurbs.com, where marketers discover vendors faster.